Hi everyone, another video up here from Alaska, July 3rd, 2020. I'm going to do a brief overview of the Laker edge install, some false ribs on the tank, superfill, slat brackets for slat mounting points. And then I'm going to talk about the covering system. I actually decided to go in a different direction recently. So starting out, this Laker edge comes in, you can kind of see you've got superfill there and superfill there. So they come in like 5 or 6 foot sections, but they're not cut width-wise perfectly. So you have to, according to the instructions, you have to do your joint on the number 5, and then they provide a smaller, it's like a 3.5 foot piece for closing out the end. Same with down there, you'll see a little bit. When you go and put your leading edge, you want it over a supported joint. Otherwise, it's just like fabric covering. If you were to just do it over unsupported joint, it's going to be flexible and it's not going to line up and it's going to look like trash. Currently, you can see that I have a lot of unsanded superfill. This is probably layer 3. And the reason being is I'm going with Oratex instead of Stewart Systems for a couple reasons. It is nearly double in price, but the maintenance and initial costs, on top of not having to buy a paint booth and an air compressor, and also the North American distributor is 30 miles away. So if I need any on-site technical support, I can just give Better Aircraft Fabrics a call and have Lars come out and show me any kind of sticking points that I have. So, and with Oratex, I guess I should note that I guess the joke is it's the yoga pants of covering. So any little imperfections like proud welds or even little spots on here, like if you look, these little mold bits, all that has to get sanded off or it's going to show through. So there's a lot more pre-covering work, I guess you could say, in order for it to look right. One other thing to note for STI builders is when the Laker edge comes, or I guess this is, I don't know if this is for the Super Sport wing, but for the STI wing, factory recommendation is you nip off about 3 inches. And you can see the pieces there. I'm saving those in case I need to reinforce anything else, like the wingtips or whatever. So it's just basically free, already bonded fiberglass. So I'm gonna end up using that somewhere. The reason they have you cut back is there's no reason to have a Laker edge this far on the bottom side anyways. It's the more important piece is up top, having a uniform tip for stall characteristics. And you cut it back, there's a mold line in the actual fiberglass when you get it, and it runs the entire span of all the pieces, so it makes it really easy to cut nice and even. In fact, this line you see, all I used was a Dremel with a rotary cutting wheel, and it's straight as an arrow. Just follow that line. Another reason they have you cut it back is it keeps when you bond this, it makes it so that they don't bow in between the false ribs, and you get this kind of goofy looking effect. So if you look down the leading edge, it's pretty uniform. You don't really see any bowing, and that's important with Oratex because it's going to show. Same on this side. As far as slat mounting brackets, I think the last time I talked about just putting a piece up here. Well, the problem with that is it relies on the cap strip glue. So actually, I didn't know this, but when the STI wing was in beta testing, they pretty much did this. They took angle, if you can see in there, and there's another one on the other side, and they sandwiched the rib and then high salt and riveted so that all the structural load and torsional load of them being out here and taking a, beating from turbulence or whatnot is on the rib and not on the cap strip. And that made a whole lot more sense to me, and I'm glad I asked about that. So for guys who are interested in slats, I've had a couple people talk to me about them. This is exactly what I did. And when Randy came over from Carbon Concepts, we broke it up into three bays, and they're about 51 inches, give or take. So I've got brackets there, I got brackets there, here, and then the final bay. So they'll be full wing length carbon fiber slats. Now on the bottom, it's kind of difficult to do any kind of bracket because the way the cap strip comes up to the spar, there's no room to put anything in between. So I think I'm going to end up doing is I've got some bulk flat piece over there, and I'm going to scuff this up real good and high sol the bottom piece and then blend it with superfill. And then so when it's covered, it's almost barely noticeable. So you have two hard points for your slat bracket that goes through fiberglass, wood, aluminum, and high sol. So it's going to be pretty rock solid. Now on the top pieces, the bottom pieces I'm most likely end up using PK screws, but the top, if I can get away with it, I'm going to end up blind riveting. Because even if I decide I don't want them, you just drill the rivets and then patch it with Oratex. And if I don't want to fly with slats, then the brackets will just, stick out and not really be in the way of anything. The VGs will still be on there. I am not going to run a mid-wing fence because it's going to stick out and interfere with the slats. So no mid-wing fence for me. Now, when it comes to these are kind of tricky, and what I'm about to show you works for both the top and the bottom. And when you get these little false riblets, they come basically, let's see if you can see here, they have got all this meat on here, and that's how they're shipped. They're basically just these pieces, and you've got to make it, and you've got to cut that main web off. And the way I did it is I took what I called my master rib and put it on the spar here, and then I had a straight edge going across from 1, 2 to 3, and I turned the rib to where it touched the straight edge and slid it over the tank so it was right here. And then I took a fine tip pin and marked exactly where it needed to be cut. And then I took and cut that master false rib and used it to get all of my ribs on both top and bottom. And it worked out perfect. I put a straight edge across. I don't know if you guys seen the picture, but put the straight edge across all three of these, and every single one is perfect. So that's something to think about. If you have a small jigsaw, I'd recommend it. I did mine with a Dremel tool and cutoff wheel and those little barrel sanders, little tiny round things, and it worked great. And I used one rib to trace all of them so I didn't get creep. So like if I were to do this one and then use this one to do this one, there's potential for it to get longer or fatter, skinnier, basically. Pretty much like when you're doing any woodworking. Now, there's lots of sanding. You can see here, this is a previous layer of high sol that I used to blend these two pieces. And it's getting better. It's nice and smooth right now. minus this and this, obviously, it pretty much wouldn't show, but I'm kind of OCD when it comes to stuff like this. So I'm doing another layer, blending the tips. This one is pretty much complete. You can see, and then it's blended down here, so there's no lip there. Beveled all this edge. And one kind of cool thing, when you go to high sol your edge on and you run your tapes over each piece, you know, because you're putting tape on each one as you put this edge on. I put a little bit of excess high sol on each of these so that when you run your tape and you go to bond this, the high sol comes out from the edge, and then when you remove your tape, it's pretty much even, and you just take I have a little mouse sander, and you sand and bevel these edges, and every single one of these transitions is pretty much perfect. You can't feel anything. So when I go put Oratex on, none of that's gonna show. There's still a lot of finish work, so if you guys see any globs or anything, it's all gonna get knocked down. The fuel filler, when you go to lay your edge over, it's obviously gonna cover. So you have to cut around, and I used aviation tin snips with since I'm right-handed, a left turn or left cutting. Then I high soled for a nice structural layer, and then this cap is going to stick up a little bit, and it's not going to look good if you cover. So I took my mouse sander, sanded the high sol down and blended it, and then got it pretty close, put a layer of high sol on. It's good, but not great. And now I have my second layer of superfill on here, and then I'm gonna knock this down here shortly. And it makes it perfect all the way over. You can't feel anything, so when you cover this with fabric, it's not gonna show whatsoever. So it'll be nice and slick. The spars are zinc chromate, aerosol, 2 cans. Pretty much took care of everything. Another thing to note, prior to the Laker Edge install, high sol pretty much ran out, and I didn't use excess amounts either. The Laker Edge, each one took 200 grams, so 100 black, 100 gray, I guess, and I ended up with about 5% remaining. And I didn't have a syringe or one of those applicator guns, and so basically what I did is, if you were to pretend this was the top, which needs a lot more bonding, as you can see, I just dipped my finger in a high sol and just kind of feathered it and walked it off my finger, and it makes a nice thin bead on that. The reason it's kind of slid over is when you go to stick your Laker Edge on there, it's really hard to drop it straight down without it moving side to side before you do your final, before you cleco it on, basically. So it ain't perfect, you know, but you're not gonna see any of that under the covering, so I'm not too worried about it. I did tape over, I moved a piece for you guys, I did tape over the lift strut brackets, so I didn't just nimbly bimbly paint over those with zinc chromate. They're all still nice and powder coated black there. What else? Now, I am going with Oratex, and I already told you why. Oratex application is considerably different than standard covering systems, and what I'll end up doing is the plane will move. It's going to come off the gear, obviously, and I'm going to put carpet down here. And when you go and put each panel on, you have to, basically clip the circumference of it, mark where it's going to be attached at, and then you have to glue on the panel, and then you have to glue on the actual aircraft structure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up using that piece of wood with clips on it once I get all the glue on each panel, and I'm going to hang it from the ceiling until the glue dries. That way I don't get dog hair in it and dust and whatnot, and it'll be up out of the way. And yeah, that's pretty much how I'm going to do that. going over here. The Oratex is going to be Fokker red, the majority of the plane, the wings, and the front half of the fuselage, to include cowl, is going to be red. And up until this point, there's going to be black diagonal stripe, and then a little bit of a red stripe, and then the remainder of the tail is going to be all black. Really matte, almost chalkboard black, and I'll explain in a later video why. Rigging is done, trim is done. Trim indicator is in. The bracket that pushes on it from the horizontal is not in. I'm not doing that until final assembly. Wires are run. They're sitting right there. ELT antenna. And then I'm going to have an Oratex antenna here, which is over on the shelf. What else? I am rib stitching. It's a non-waxed rib stitch. You can't use waxed rib stitching string, I guess, because when you go to heat it, it's going to weep into the fabric and it's going to cause it to stain. So the reason I'm rib stitching, I have full faith in Oratex glue and I have full faith in the Hysol cap strips, but for peace of mind, I want a mechanical bond around these cap strips, because if not, then that glue that's on the cap strip with the pressure up here, the negative pressure, it puts all the stress on the cap strip itself. And you know, if you're flying negative 20, 30 degrees, which oftentimes happens up here, I don't know the degradation or the structural limit of Hysol in that cold, and I hit some nasty turbulence. I don't want these cap strips being the weak link. So it's going to be rib stitched and bonded. So it should make for a really, really good layer, I guess you could say. Other than that, well, the only thing I have remaining is pitot. And I'm not doing any fancy pitot like Dynon or Garmin. I'm just doing that little piece of pipe, like an old Cub or whatnot. I have no use for an AOA pitot because I'm running a bomb, level aviation bomb. So that'll be my full Adahars with AOA. And then wingtip lights, I'm going to do the kit plane parts, wingtip lights. And so I'm going to run the wiring for that as soon as Spruce decides to get it in stock, because we have one local. And then I'm going to do, I think, what is it, the Aero LEDs hanging off the lift strut bracket for wigwag and landing lights. Now, one thing I just recently found out is it's kind of being beta tested, but Kitfox is developing extended STI wingtips. I think it makes this about double the size of what this one is now. So I think what I saw is they're going to have, kind of like the Super Sport wing, the tips, they're going to have a bay for landing lights in there. So as soon as those things are done being beta tested and they hit the actual catalog, I'll end up getting a set of those. Another thing to note is you see these are foam core, and what you need to do is you need to carve out about 1/8 of an inch in here in between these two hard pieces and Hysol a bead in there and then sand it all down and make it smooth. Otherwise, I mean, you can just push your finger in that, you can hear it. It just crushes it. What else? Now, as far as color scheme, like I said, fuselage and wings are going to be red. Ailerons will be red. Anything that's black powder coated will remain black. The lift strut fairings are going to be painted black. Flaperons are going to be red. The counterweights on the flaperons are going to be remaining black. The wing portion of that will be red. The stall fence tip is going to be black. And then one other thing, the landing gear. Pretty on the fence about the landing gear, whether or not I want to cover. Majority of the Cubs up here are not covered for specific reasons. And that being, this plane that I'm building is not going to be a show plane. It's not going to be a hangar queen or a baby. I'm going to use the crap out of this thing. And when you cover the gear, it's a piece of the lift strut fairing, the PVC, and you cut it lengthwise and you put a piece here, put the trailing edge here, and then you cover. Well, if I'm going in big rocks and sticks and beach landings, it leaves this pretty susceptible to being knocked off, holes punched through it. I just don't want to deal with it. And another reason is if you look from here in the pilot's perspective, you have a whole lot of visibility without those things covered. I got it. You can see plenty up here, but you know, if you miss something and there's a stick here and it's sticking up and you're taxiing on a beach with big old mountain eggs, 6-inch rocks or whatnot, and you go to taxi and it goes underneath, you're not going to see that, and you could potentially get a hole in your tail. I don't want to deal with that. Might make it a little bit slower, not worried. Everybody I fly with is Cubs anyways. And we all know that they're not the fastest thing in the world. So, yep, she's pretty much ready for cover. Landing gear needs to come off. Need to finish sanding, pitot, wiring, wingtips, and she's ready to go. So hopefully the next video you see is with some red covering on it. So I hope I answered any questions that anybody had. If you have any, feel free to ask. I'm not an expert, but you know, hey, maybe I did something that you were questionable about, and hey, even if you see stuff that's wrong, call me out on it. I love constructive criticism. I may not be able to undo it on some of the stuff, but you know, I'll take it into consideration. So that's all I got. Hope everybody has a wonderful 4th of July weekend, despite this craziness going on. Make the best of it, and I will see everybody later.